The Chicago skyline glittered like broken glass the night Julian Rivers watched his empire crumble. He stood in his office on the 47th floor of Rivers Tech Tower, staring at numbers that made no sense. Millions were vanishing from accounts he controlled. Trades he never authorized were appearing in his name. His phone buzzed with angry messages from investors, lawyers, and board members who wanted his head on a plate. The betrayal revealed. Television mounted on his wall flashed breaking news. His face filled the screen beside his former partner, Derek Hammond. Julian's stomach dropped as Derek spoke to reporters with fake tears in his eyes. Derek claimed Julian had forced him to commit fraud, that Julian had threatened his family, that everything illegal had been Julian's idea from the start. It was all lies. Beautiful, polished lies that the world was already swallowing whole. Julian had met Derek in college. They had built Rivers Tech together from a dorm room project into a billion-dollar artificial intelligence company. Julian had trusted Derek with everything. He had signed papers without reading them because Derek said they were routine. He had approved Derek's suggestions because they were partners. Now Derek was painting himself as the victim, while Julian became the villain. The public execution within hours. The story exploded across every platform. Hashtags trended calling for Julian's arrest. Former employees gave interviews claiming they always knew something was wrong. Business partners deleted photos with him from their social media. His girlfriend of 3 years sent a text saying she could not be associated with a criminal and blocked his number before he could respond. The Securities and Exchange Commission froze all his accounts. The FBI announced an investigation. His lawyers told him to stay silent while they figured out a defense strategy. But silence meant watching the world destroy him one headline at a time. Tech mogul Julian Rivers exposed as fraud architect. Rivers Tech scandal wipes out thousands of retirement accounts. How Julian Rivers fooled Silicon Valley? The descent: Julian left his office building through a service exit to avoid the cameras swarming the main entrance. He wore a hoodie pulled low over his face, but someone still recognized him. A stranger spat at his feet and called him a thief. Another person recorded him on their phone, probably uploading it before Julian even reached the corner. He wandered through Chicago's downtown streets without direction. Everything felt surreal. 24 hours ago, he had been preparing a speech for a tech conference. Now he was unemployed, broke, and hated by millions of people who had never met him. His mother called crying, begging him to tell her the truth. He could barely speak. How could he explain that he was innocent when all the evidence pointed to him? The edge of giving up rain started falling around midnight. Julian found himself walking toward Lake Michigan, drawn by the dark water. He had grown up in Chicago, swimming in this lake during summers, dreaming about success. Now those dreams felt like somebody else's memories. He climbed over a railing near the shoreline where the waves crashed against concrete. The water looked cold and final. His mind replayed every moment of the last 2 days. Derek's betrayal, the media circus, the death threats flooding his email, the way his own mother's voice had trembled with doubt. Maybe everyone would be better off if he just disappeared. At least then the story would end. The voice in the darkness, terrible night for swimming. The voice came from behind him, calm and unbothered by the rain. Julian turned and saw a young woman standing a few feet away. She wore a worn denim jacket and carried a backpack covered in patches. Her dark hair stuck to her face from the rain, and she looked at him with an expression that was not quite concern but something gentler. "I'm not swimming," Julian said, his voice hollow. "Good." She stepped closer. "'Cause that water's freezing and probably full of old boat fuel. Really undignified way to go." Julian almost laughed, despite everything. "Do I know you?" "Nope, but I know that look." She gestured at the railing. "I've seen it before, usually right before someone does something they can't take back." Nina Torres. She introduced herself as Nina Torres. She worked at an all-night diner 2 blocks away and had been walking home when she noticed him climbing the railing. She did not recognize him as Julian Rivers, tech billionaire. She just saw someone standing too close to the edge. "Come get coffee," she said. "It's cheap and terrible, but it's warm. And you look like you could use warm right now." Julian wanted to refuse, but something about her directness cut through the fog in his brain. She was not offering pity or judgment, just coffee. He followed her away from the lake, his shoes squelching with each step. The diner was called Rosie's, a cramped place with cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lights that hummed too loud. Nina poured him coffee without asking how he took it and slid into the booth across from him. She did not ask questions. She just sat there, occasionally glancing up from her phone. "Why did you stop me?" Julian finally asked. Nina shrugged. "Because nobody deserves to feel that alone. Whatever you're going through, it won't last forever. But jumping into a freezing lake definitely lasts forever." The first kindness. Julian stared at the stranger who had saved his life without knowing who he was. In his old world, people wanted things from him. Money, connections, opportunities. Nina wanted nothing. She'd simply seen another human being in pain and decided to care. "Thank you," he whispered. Nina smiled. "Don't mention it." "Literally. My manager hates when I leave work to drag strangers away from the lake. Says it's not in my job description." For the first time in days, Julian felt something other than despair. It was small and fragile, but it was there. A tiny spark of hope that maybe the story was not over yet. He did not know that, this moment, in a rundown diner with a woman who would not even charge him for the coffee, would become the foundation of everything that came next. Outside, the rain continued falling. But inside Rosie's diner, Julian Rivers began the slow journey of learning how to be human again. Julian learned quickly that being broke made you invisible. The face that once appeared on magazine covers and conference stages meant nothing when it was gaunt and unshaven, hidden under a cheap baseball cap. He found a room in a boarding house. On the south side, the kind of place that rented by the week and asked no questions. The walls were thin enough to hear his neighbors arguing, and the radiator clanked like it had a personal grudge against sleep. Nina's world. He returned to Rosie's diner the next evening, telling himself it was just for the coffee. Nina was wiping down tables when he walked in. She looked up and grinned like they were old friends. "Lake Guy returns. I'm guessing you decided to stick around?" Julian nodded and slid into the same booth. Nina brought him coffee and a menu, even though the plastic pages were so worn the prices had faded. When she asked if he was hungry, he admitted he did not have much money. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "Employee meal," she said, waving off his protest. "I get 1 free meal per shift, but I already ate at home, so you might as well have it, otherwise it goes in the trash." It was a lie. He could tell from the way she glanced away, but he was too hungry to argue. The eggs tasted better than any 5-star meal he remembered. Learning to survive over the following weeks, Nina became his guide to a world he had never truly known. She taught him which grocery stores had the best clearance sections. She showed him how to ride the bus system without getting lost. She explained which neighborhoods were safe to walk through after dark and which ones required awareness. "You move like someone who's never had to watch their back," she observed one afternoon as they walked through a street market. "Keep your wallet in your front pocket. Don't make eye contact with guys hanging around corners. And if someone asks you for money, either give them $1 or keep walking. Don't stop and think about it." Julian absorbed everything. These were lessons his business school education had never covered. He started applying for jobs, but his resume was impossible. He could not list his actual experience without revealing his identity. Nina helped him create a fake work history, simple enough to be believable. "Say you worked in accounting for small firms," she suggested. "Nothing fancy. Just boring spreadsheet stuff that nobody will call to verify." He got rejected from 15 positions before landing a job washing dishes at a restaurant near Navy Pier. The work was brutal. His hands cracked from the hot water and harsh soap. His back ached from standing for 8 shifts. But the anonymity felt like armor. The recognition. 3 weeks into his new life, Julian was eating lunch in a park near Nina's apartment when he saw his own face on someone's phone. A man sitting on the next bench was reading an article about the Rivers tech scandal. The investigation was ongoing. Derek Hammond had testified before Congress, looking somber and repentant. Julian's mother had given an interview saying she did not know what to believe anymore. His hands started shaking. Nina, who had joined him on her break, noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he lied. But Nina followed his gaze to the man's phone. Her eyes widened as she recognized the face on the screen, then looked at Julian with dawning realization. She grabbed his arm and pulled him up from the bench. Leading him away quickly, the truth revealed they ended up in her apartment, a tiny studio above a laundromat. Nina paced while Julian sat on her futon, waiting for the anger or betrayal. Instead, she turned to him and asked a single question. "Did you do it?" "No." The word came out raw and honest. "Derek did everything. He forged my signatures, created fake email accounts in my name. I trusted him completely, and he used that trust to build a case against me." Nina studied his face for a long moment. Then she sat down beside him. Okay? Julian repeated, confused. "I believe you." She shrugged. "I've served coffee to enough liars to know what they look like. You're not lying. You're just scared and angry and lost." Standing in the fire the next day at Rosie's diner, a group of customers were loudly discussing the Rivers tech scandal. One man declared that Julian Rivers should be locked up forever. Another woman said people like him ruined the economy for ordinary folks. Nina was refilling their coffee when she heard them. She set the pot down with enough force to make them jump. "You don't know anything about Julian Rivers, except what you've seen on TV? Maybe try thinking for yourselves instead of letting cable news do it for you." The customers stared at her, shocked. One of them asked if she was defending a criminal. Nina crossed her arms. "I'm defending the idea that people are innocent until proven guilty. Remember that concept. It used to be important." Julian watched from the kitchen, stunned. Nina had known the truth for less than 24 hours. And she was already fighting battles he had given up on fighting himself. Building something new, Nina became his strategist. She had no business training, but she understood people in ways his expensive education never taught him. She suggested he start documenting everything he remembered about Derek's activities. Every suspicious email, every odd request. Every time Derek had insisted on handling something alone, they worked at her kitchen table. Julian writing while Nina researched on her old laptop. She found public records that did not match Derek's testimony. She discovered articles from years ago about Derek's previous business ventures, small scams that had gone unnoticed. "He's done this before," Nina said, highlighting a paragraph. "Different partner, smaller scale, but the pattern's the same." Julian felt hope stirring for the first time since his fall. "How did you find this?" "Public library. Free internet and way better research databases than people think." She grinned. "You rich people always forget about libraries." The partnership forms over the next months. Their relationship shifted into something neither could quite name. Nina taught him how to cook meals that cost less than $5. Julian helped her with paperwork for a small business loan she was pursuing. They fell into an easy rhythm. Two people from completely different worlds learning each other's languages. One night, sitting on the fire escape outside her apartment, Nina asked him what he would do if he cleared his name. Julian thought about it for a long time. "I'd build something different. Something that actually helps people instead of just moving money around. Like what?" "I don't know yet, but it would have to mean something. Otherwise, what was the point of all this?" Nina smiled. "Look at you, getting philosophical. I learned from a very wise diner waitress." She punched his arm lightly. But her hand lingered there for a moment, and Julian felt the warmth of it spreading through his chest. He was starting to understand that maybe his old empire had been impressive, but it had never been real. This, sitting on a rusty fire escape, with a woman who had every reason to abandon him, but chose to stay. This was real. The city stretched out before them, full of lights and noise and endless possibilities. Julian Rivers had lost everything the world told him mattered. But sitting there with Nina, he realized he was richer than he had ever been before. 6 months after his fall, Julian received an unexpected phone call. A former Rivers Tech employee named Thomas Brennan wanted to meet. Thomas had been Derek's assistant, quiet and overlooked. Now he was ready to talk. They met in a coffee shop, far from downtown. Thomas slid a flash drive across the table with shaking hands. "I made copies of everything before I quit," Thomas said quietly. Derek's emails, the fake documents. Voice recordings of him bragging about framing you. I was scared to come forward before, but I can't sleep anymore knowing what he did. Julian stared at the flash drive like it was a winning lottery ticket and a loaded gun combined. Nina, sitting beside him, squeezed his hand. "Why now?" she asked Thomas, "'cause Derek fired me when I asked too many questions. And because what he did to Julian was wrong," Thomas stood up. "My contact information is on there. Use it however you need to." The counterattack begins. Julian turned the evidence over to his lawyers, who had never stopped believing in his innocence, even when he had stopped believing in himself. Within weeks, federal investigators confirmed the documents were authentic. Derek Hammond's perfect story started unraveling like cheap thread. News outlets that had destroyed Julian's reputation suddenly scrambled to cover the reversal. But Julian did not care about public vindication yet. He cared about rebuilding correctly. He and Nina spent long nights planning something entirely new. She asked him questions nobody in his old world would have thought to ask. Who gets hurt when tech companies grow too fast? What happens to the workers nobody talks about? How do you make sure power doesn't corrupt you again? The new foundation. Julian sold his remaining assets from the old company and started from scratch. He called it Foundation Tech, a name Nina suggested because it sounded honest. The company's mission was simple: create technology that solved real problems for ordinary people. No flashy promises. No growth at any cost. Just useful tools built by people, paid fair wages. Nina insisted he hire people from neighborhoods like hers. Former inmates rebuilding their lives, single parents needing flexible schedules. People who had been overlooked by traditional tech companies. Julian's former colleagues thought he was crazy. Nina told him he was finally getting sane. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said. "That's what you got. Pay it forward." Nina's Ascension Foundation Tech's first product was an app helping low-income families find resources: food banks, free medical clinics, job training programs, housing assistance. Nina had designed the concept based on her own struggles. They launched it quietly, expecting modest results. Within 3 months, 2 million people were using it. Investors came calling, but Julian was careful now. He accepted funding only from people who shared their values. Nina, who had resisted joining the company officially, finally agreed to become Chief Community Officer. She laughed at the title, but took the job seriously. "I grew up in the world we're trying to help," she told the team during their first strategy meeting. "I know what works and what's just rich people feeling good about themselves. We're going to do what works." The public vindication when the federal prosecutor announced charges against Derek Hammond. Julian refused to do a victory lap. He released a simple statement thanking Thomas Brennan for his courage in asking the media to focus on the real victims, the people who had lost money trusting Rivers. Techie donated his settlement from the lawsuit to a fund helping those investors rebuild. The public response surprised him. People who had sent death threats now sent apologies. Business shows that had called him a fraud now wanted interviews. He declined most of them. He did one interview with a local Chicago news station and spent it talking about Foundation Tech's mission rather than his vindication. "The past happened," he told the interviewer. "I can't change it, but I can build something better moving forward." Proposal on. The proposal on the 1-year anniversary of the night Nina found him by the lake. Julian took her back to that spot. The water looked less dark now, reflecting city lights instead of despair. They stood by the railing where she had pulled him back from the edge. "I've been thinking about kingdoms," Julian said. Nina raised an eyebrow. "That's random." "Not really. A year ago, I thought I had a kingdom. Big company, money, power. But it was built on sand. It collapsed the moment someone pushed." He turned to face her. "You taught me that real kingdoms aren't built from wealth. They're built from people who actually give a damn about each other." "Getting philosophical again," Nina teased. But her voice was soft. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Nina's eyes widened. "I'm not asking you to be my queen because that's too medieval and also kind of sexist. I'm asking you to be my partner. In everything. Because nothing I build means anything without you." The ring was simple, no massive diamond. Just a gold band with a tiny inscription inside. from ruins to kingdoms. Nina's eyes filled with tears. "You're such a sap. Is that a yes?" "Obviously." She kissed him hard, and somewhere above them the city continued its endless noise. But they heard none of it. The true Empire Foundation tech grew steadily. Not explosively, but sustainably. They opened offices in 10 cities, each one hiring locally. They created programs teaching coding skills to people who could never afford traditional education. They built tools helping small businesses compete with corporations. Every product launched with one question: does this make ordinary people's lives better? Nina ran community outreach with the same fierce determination she had shown that night in the diner. She never forgot where she came from. She hired people from Rosie's diner, from her old neighborhood, from the streets she had walked when money was tight. She gave them chances nobody else would. Julian learned to lead differently. He listened more. He admitted mistakes faster. He built slower but stronger. The business press called him reformed, like he was a criminal who had found religion. He did not care about their labels anymore. The wedding they married in a small ceremony at Rosie's diner, the owner. Rosie herself catered with the same terrible coffee and surprisingly good pie she had always served. Employees from Foundation Tech mixed with Nina's family and friends from the neighborhood. Thomas Brennan came, no longer nervous, and thanked them both for showing him that doing the right thing mattered. Julian's mother cried through the whole ceremony. She had never stopped believing in him, even when doubt crept into her voice. Now, she watched her son marry a woman who had saved his life without knowing she was saving it. When Julian and Neon exchanged vows, they did not promise forever or perfection. They promised to keep choosing each other, especially when things got hard. They promised to build something real from whatever ruins life handed them. The kingdom complete, 5 years after his fall. Julian stood in Foundation Tech's headquarters, watching employees collaborate on a new project helping homeless individuals find shelters and services. Nina stood beside him, pregnant with their first child, directing a team with the same no-nonsense style she had always had. "You know what's funny?" Julian said. "What?" "I used to think I had everything, but I had nothing. Now I have less money than before, more stress, and I've never been happier." Nina patted her belly. "Wait until this one arrives. Then you'll really know stress." Julian laughed. But she was right. This was the kingdom they had built together. Not from money or power, but from the simple decision to see each other's humanity when the world refused to. From ruins, they had created something that mattered. And that, Julian finally understood, was the only kind of empire worth having. The city lights stretched beyond the windows, full of people struggling and surviving and hoping. Julian and Nina had been those people. Now they worked every day to make sure others got the same second chances they had given each other. The story that had started with betrayal and a near ending by a cold lake had become something neither could have imagined. It had become real.